So we're here today to hear from the new CFO for the City and County of Denver, Brendan Hanlon. He just took over a few weeks ago from Kerry Kennedy. With 14 years of service to the city, Hanlon has most recently served as the city's budget director. Started that position in May of 2011, and he delivered balanced budgets from 2012 up until the present. He helped the city's structural finance task force and guided development of ballot Measure 2A in 2012, which eliminated the city's structural budget deficit. I noticed we do have a municipal portfolio manager in the room. I'm sure he's aware of that, Ken. Hanlon is a graduate of the University of Connecticut with a BA in political science and history and a master's of public affairs, concentrating in public budgeting. He spent his financial professional career serving Denver in various roles with the city's budget management office, and while in budget office, Hanlon served as a member of the Denver Sheriff's Department's Reform Implementation Committee. Furthermore, he also recommended safety-related bond projects that would become part of the Better Denver bond issuance. And he is 3 weeks into the job as the CFO, taking over from Kerry Kennedy. So, without further ado, here's Brendan Hanlon. Thank you.
So, thanks for having me. The last time I was in this room, I was giving a presentation on the Structural Financial Task Force, as a matter of fact, before we implemented Ballot Measure 2A. So, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It is true that I am 3 weeks on the job at this point in time, so I will take questions and I will do my best to answer them. If I cannot answer them in this room, I'm committed to getting back to you folks and getting you those details. So. Just a little bit of background about myself. I've been with the city, as was mentioned, for 14 years, primarily working in the Budget and Management Office. I did spend some time in Mayor Hickenlooper's Office of Accountability and Reform, working on performance management with city departments. But primarily my experience has been in the public budgeting field, and you'll see that there's a few slides in this presentation that are budget focused, and those are the ones that I'm most comfortable kind of going back and forth with, but I'm going to give kind of an overview of the city's finances and whatnot. But before I do that, I'll just talk a little bit about the Denver's Department of Finance. So the Department of Finance is made up of 6 divisions: assessment, cash risk and capital funding, the City Controller's Office, who provides the accounting for the city, budget and management, which is my previous division, real estate, so they manage our real estate portfolio, and treasury. One of the odd things about treasury you might find, unlike other cities that have a DMV that's contained within the clerk and recorder's type function, ours is in the treasury function. So I have the privilege of overseeing the DMV branches, currently 4, will soon be 5 DMV branches. So Denver's financial outlook. So we are a AAA rated city from S&P, Moody's, and Fitch, and that has been affirmed over the past, I believe, 11 years at this point in time. And that's specifically related to our sound financial management practice and moderate debt levels. We have had 34 consecutive years of awards for our comprehensive annual financial report, or our financial statements, and we just began producing PAFR, so it's kind of a condensed version, a more digestible version of our comprehensive annual financial reports. One note that isn't on here, but our budget book has been awarded the GFOA's award for budget documents for, I believe it's 27 consecutive years. So we really value transparency and adhering to those standards of public reporting for our financial documents. Currently, we have 20% of the city's operating budget, so general fund operating budget, in uncommitted reserves. So that's made up of three basic structures. We have our undesignated fund balance, we have a 2% budget contingency that's required by charter, and then we also have our Tabor reserve. I've sometimes described that as kind of our last line of defense because it has a 12-month replenishment requirement, so it usually falls at the bottom of our reserve policy. Our tax collection rate is 99%, which is incredible when you think about the work that Treasury team does. And yes, we maintained a balanced budget throughout the recession. So we had 5 consecutive years of budget cuts, and I think they totaled approximately $550 million over that time of cuts that were needed on a given basis. Those numbers fluctuated each year based on the budget solutions that we implemented. So just some notes. We have on the National Citizen Survey. So since 2002, the Budget Office has conducted a National Citizen Survey. It's part of our performance management system. So what we always try to do is check on what is the citizens' perception of our services. I'm highlighting a few things here that are a little bit more related to the macro scope, but you could find our National Citizen Survey document on our website in the Department of Finance. And we kind of do provide a summary to City Council every year. But to no surprise, the citizens' feedback on our economy has been particularly strong, and it's been higher than other comparable cities. 74% of residents rated Denver's quality of life as either excellent or good, and 89% rated Denver as an excellent or good place to live. There are, I think, about 60 different questions that we ask. These were just some highlights. We asked about public safety, parks conditions, other struggles as well. And there were usually some open-ended questions that we ask about, not just canned answers in terms of what do you think of the city's quality of life, what do you think of the city's condition as a good place to live, but also the general feedback. We send out about 3,000 surveys per year. We get somewhere between 600 to 700 surveys back, and that's been consistent over the past few years. So, where does Denver rank? So back in 2013, there was an audit conducted of the city's finances, and specifically the strength of our finances. And during this audit, we were compared to the following jurisdictions that you see up on the screen. And our current financial position, so these are numbers as of 2014, ranked first. Denver's long-term financial position ranked third amongst these cities, and Denver's reserves, so that 20% that I mentioned, ranked first as well. I think the city, and specifically the Department of Finance, and I know the mayor takes a lot of pride in the financial condition of the city. One of his first initiatives was ballot measure 2A. So the work of the Structural Financial Task Force was to look at the city's revenue and expenditure structure, and identified a misalignment between those two structures, and then solve for that misalignment. Part of those measures was ballot measure 2A, which helped remove the Tabor restrictions from our taxes across the board. In the past, property taxes were not, we had not removed those Tabor restrictions from property tax. It included those moving forward, and actually that was one of the citations from the bond rating agencies on our AAA bond rating, was that removal of those constraints over time. I could talk in depth around ballot measure 2A, anti-spiking provisions, growth in property taxes, so I'll take the questions after this presentation, but I can give a full, at least half-hour story on that alone. So other notes around Denver's financial position, and these are slides directly from a recent bond presentation that we gave for the National Western Stock Show in the Colorado Convention Center. You all probably know that in November ballot measure 2C passed, and it is going to be issuing debt for those two projects, and these are slides directly from that presentation. I think what these say, when I'm asked about why is Denver growing as much as it is, I think a major driver is our population growth. We've seen tremendous population growth, and with more people comes more economic activity, and with more economic activity comes more revenue for the city. And we've seen very strong population growth, and we're forecasting, I think it's through 2020, another 75,000 people will be added to the Denver metro area. So that population growth is expected to continue, and will drive our economic profile. But it'll also bring with it some challenges, and I'm going to talk about what some of those challenges are on the horizons for the city. In terms of accolades, I just wanted to mention the last bullet here. This was just announced I believe it was yesterday, or it was in this morning's paper, around U.S. News and World Report ranked Denver as the #1 place to live in 2016. So we've had a lot of strong accolades over the past few years, but they continue. And I think you can see it in terms of that economic activity, the draw of Colorado and the Denver metro area and Denver itself to folks from outside the state. I'm a transplant myself, so I grew up in Connecticut, and I was drawn to Colorado for the opportunity, the climate. It's a beautiful place to live, and I think a lot of folks are experiencing that as well, and that's driving population and economic growth. So other economic indicators, Colorado's unemployment and the Denver metro unemployment still outperform the national numbers. 4.2% unemployment rate declined from 4.2% in December 2014 to 3.5% in 2015, while the nation was still at 5%. The metro area performed that much better, 4% in December of 2014, down to 3.1% in 2015. So just an incredible performance. And we've seen this since the recovery has taken over, is that we have outpaced the nation, the Denver metro area, outpaced the nation and outpaced the state. So we are a driving force in the unemployment, traditional unemployment number. So this is not disaffected workers and whatnot. This is the traditional reported on unemployment rate. Payroll, jobs, and growth. Colorado job growth increased 2.9% in 2015. Nationally, 2.1%. So still exceeding in that area. Metro Denver, again, outperforming even the state at 3.2% in 2015. And we imagine that those numbers are going to continue in the Denver metro area. I think we have been very fortunate in terms of our economic performance. There are a number of other cities who would envy our position, both Denver and the metro area. Just being back east just a few days ago, not all of our peers are experiencing the growth that Denver and the Denver metro area have experienced over this past 4-year period of time. So, two subjects that I could rattle off the top of my head, because now I'm going to try to get into the 2016 budget a little bit. So I had mentioned before that with this economic opportunity that we've been seeing and the growth and the population growth, there have been some challenges that we've experienced as a city. The first is mobility. So I think anyone who has driven through the city and the metro area recently recognizes that there is much more congestion than there was 2-3 years ago. So the city in the 2016 budget is investing additional funds in our mobility projects. I'm not going to go into each one of these items, but $7.1 million for 2016, which is an 18% increase. And I'll talk a little bit about a mobility working group that has been convened to address these challenges as well, because I think this is just the beginning of these series of investments. The 7.1 was in addition to the $40 million base budget from 2015. Safety net. So I think this will not be a surprise to anyone in this room that affordable housing is becoming an increased challenge in the city and county of Denver, because of the low supply and the high demand that we've been experiencing. It has just increased those valuations to the point where a number of folks in the city and county of Denver cannot afford housing. So one of the efforts that we've had going on for about 18 months now is an investment in a permanent, dedicated investment in affordable housing in the city. And right now we're looking at establishing, there's $8 million programmed in the 2016 budget. We're looking to increase that to $15 million per year in the 2017 budget. We're doing the work on that at this point in time. That would be built into the 2017 budget, which would be developed in August and September of this year. There are also other investments, though, outside of affordable housing, specifically Solution Center. So that is a facility that will help folks who are chronically homeless, who have they're for our most challenging population. So drug use issues as well as mental health issues. This is an area where folks could get sustained. I think the vision is for 30 to 90 day type intensive treatment to hopefully bring them to some sense of stability so that way we could work with them to get transitional housing and get them off of the streets. So that is a $4 million investment. The Social Impact Bond Program, which I'll probably get a few questions on because I always get a few questions about the Social Impact Bond Program. That is a $2.9 million investment in the 2016 budget, and that Social Impact Bond is also focused on homeless population, specifically those who end up in our emergency rooms and our jail facilities the most often. So that's the top 250 folks who are in our facilities most frequently, with the idea that there will then be a return on the investment for them not finding themselves in the emergency room repeatedly, not being in our jail facilities repeatedly. We've also reserved funds for shelter beds, $1.5 million for a 200 bed facility. That facility is yet to be identified. We're still working through that at this point in time. And then we had increases in child welfare staffing and our behavioral health programs. And another major investment was the Denver Sheriff's Department. I'm sure you are all familiar with the challenges that the Sheriff's Department has been experiencing over the past few years. We have invested $24 million in the Sheriff's Department in 2016 through a combination of recruitment. So one of the challenges that we've been experiencing is making sure that we have enough staff to fill the positions that we have budgeted. So $6.9 million for 200 recruits. Just so you get a scale, my background was working with the safety agencies when I first started with the city, and Sheriff was one of my agencies. And typically they would have 2 classes of between 20 to 40 sheriffs each year. So you're looking at 40 to 80 total for 1 year to just kind of keep up their filled positions. For next year alone, our goal is 200. So we're trying to aggressively move to fill positions. We've also, the next piece down is added FTEs, so full-time equivalents, increased staff in those facilities based on the recommendations that came out of third-party reviews. So we're trying to fill vacancies that currently exist, as well as the 70 positions that we're adding over the course of 2016. Additional training, $2.5 million, specifically for crisis and intervention training. Actually, we have kind of retooled that, and now that is the kind of singular focus for 2016 at this point in time. So we've kind of shelved the other leadership and, well, no, the use of force training is also in there. So the leadership training was a component of that. We put that to the side to really focus on critical incident training for 2016. And then technology and capital investments. We will be building out a couple floors of the county jail facility out at Smith Road to provide additional flexibility and capacity for that facility. So I'm not going to go through all of these other proposals, but just some other notes that you might have read about in the paper or have questions about. We have invested $3 million in the Emerald Ash Borer response. So I think there was an article in the paper, or there was a news story on 9 News or something around the challenges that Boulder has been experiencing. There was a set of city employees who went and visited some of the cities that have been decimated by this bug over the past few months. And the recommendation that we had from those cities that have done this the best is do not wait until you see the problem. Proactively start addressing these trees immediately, because if you wait until you see the problem, you are probably already 4 years in, and you will see a far greater spike in the death curve of ash trees. So $3 million program, I imagine that's going to be, we could be looking at a 10-year program at this point in time because of the large quantity of trees, ash trees that we have throughout the city. Expanded retail, I always get questions about marijuana and retail marijuana and the revenue collected. This was a $2 million increase in the enforcement, regulation, and education around our retail marijuana establishments. Let's see, other things to highlight here. We're always focused on our street condition, and we added a new maintenance and pothole crew. I'm sure over the past few months, as you've been driving around and with the congestion, you're probably noticing potholes more. We've added another crew to help us deal with that challenge. and then additional rec center hours and youth programming. So ballot measures. As I mentioned before, we had a few ballot measures in as part of the end of 2015. The first was a new National Western Center, so rebuilding that campus. I'll show you guys a picture of that in a second, so I'm not going to get into this too much. But we'll be partnering with Colorado State University, with the National Western Association, who's at that site at this point in time, and we're going to be trying to gather partners to redevelop that site. Some great images of that site development you'll see in a couple of slides. And also the new expanded use of airport land out at DIA and adjacent to DIA. That ballot measure was not only passed by the city and county of Denver, but also Adams County. So the residents of those cities also had to pass that measure, which will allow for a greater commercial use of land around that development. So annual. Going back a little bit, I should have actually switched these slides out now that I read through here. So one of the questions I get from community members, because while everyone's interested in operating dollars, there are a lot of questions about capital investments, specifically around street condition, our parks and recreation facilities. The majority of our capital maintenance program is on maintenance. So what we've tried to do is make sure that when we've gone out and committed to maintenance programs with residents inside the city and county of Denver, that we remain committed to maintenance. I think it's all too often that you could find yourself enamored with a new program. We try to maintain these capital dollars generated by property tax to perform maintenance. So we have 1,900 center lane miles of paved streets to maintain. 584 bridges, over 2,000 miles of storm drainage and sanitary sewer lines, and 4,000 acres of urban parkland. So that number does not include, I believe, the 16,000 acres of mountain park acres that are up in the mountains at this point in time. So this is only the 4,000 that are immediately down in Denver. We anticipated and programmed a 7% increase in capital maintenance as part of the 2016 budget. So just a little conversation on our debt structure. So I'm not going to get into each of these pieces. You all are likely familiar, but this is part of a briefing that we provided the council recently. We have a number of different financing tools that we leverage for city projects. Geo bonds, so our last Geo bond was the Better Denver bond, A through I. We're wrapping up those investments at this point in time. The last remaining is our cultural programs. We have a plan at this point in time. We're thinking about 2017 to go forward with another bond issuance, but those conversations are very preliminary at this point in time. But that's kind of the target date for right now. Revenue bonds, so the excise tax bond, which I'll describe here in a minute, which was the National Western Center and the Colorado Convention Center. That was our most recent transaction. The enterprise fund, so you have DEN, so that's the new acronym for DIA. We're starting to use the new call sign DEN instead of DIA. They are an enterprise fund. Golf and wastewater all have the ability to go into the market on their own using their own revenue streams. They don't have to go to the people as the Geo bond program would have to, or excise tax related bonds. And then COPs, we do use COPs, so lease purchase type agreements, for some of our city facilities, but these are kind of infrequently used. I think the last one that I remember that we had used was for the Central Denver Rec Center. So that was, I think that transaction was not last year, but the end of 2014. And lastly, commercial paper. That's more of a stopgap that we've used in our financial structures rather than something we leverage on a frequent basis. If you want to get a sense of what our existing snapshot looks like, this is pre-National Western and Colorado Convention Center transaction that's going through at this point in time. So $5 billion debt profile, significant, the majority of it is at DIA, the city or the non-DIA portion at 1.4 or 26%. Just to kind of emphasize where our distribution is for the city portion, or I should say the non-DIA portion. GO bonds makes up 57%, or the vast majority of that. Certificates of participation at, 28%. Excise tax revenue, so pre-National Western Center distribution of funds, that will go up by approximately $200 million at 12%. And Gulf and wastewater, those are the two enterprise funds. Those two enterprise funds have the ability to issue their own debt based on their own revenue schedules. So National Western Convention Center project. So just a brief overview: redevelopment and transformation of the existing National Western Complex site and Denver Coliseum sites. Sometimes I wonder if that description understates the impact this project is going to have in that area of the city. Global area, Swansea, is a long, I would say neglected is probably the right word, area of the city. It will bring vast improvements to that area of the city with better infrastructure. We've also paired one of the ways that we try to manage the growth of the general fund is transfers off of the general fund to our capital improvement fund. So one of the pairings that goes with a transaction like this was a $26.5 million investment in Brighton Boulevard. So that section of Brighton Boulevard from Broadway out to I-70, you'll see the natural construction that's taken hold. That is before city investment has been made in that corridor. So I think the goal is to change that into the true front door of the city. Having been here been with the city for 14 years, I remember when we were bidding on the DNC, and one of the ideas was, boy, what should we bring folks down Brighton Boulevard? And I think the universal response was that probably would not be the best idea. But I think folks saw it as a missed opportunity. That would be a great way to take folks from DIA and then bring them in and kind of reveal the city to them. As you go past Coors Field and into immediate downtown, I think folks, wished that was the opportunity that was available to them at that point in time. I think you're going to see that kind of transformation with that $26.5 million investment along that area. So just to full disclosure, that section, so from Broadway to I-20 to I-70, is the first two phases of three. The other phase will be impacted by the National Western Center, which is just north of the highway. So I think it's investments like this. So master plan phases for the National Western Complex, $856 million investment. Right now, the debt issuance that we put out for approximately $200 million is really focused on two things: land acquisition and rail consolidation. So we're really just trying to get the site ready and compiled so that way work can begin. So this is multiple decades worth of investments. And just some sources of funds on the right-hand side: $669 million from the City and County of Denver, dedicated revenue bonds. So that is funded by lodgers, auto A and B, so car rental taxes, as well as food and beverage taxes. So all tourism-related taxes. We anticipate $121 million from the state of Colorado, so there's an article in the newspaper around the city being awarded RTA, Regional Transportation Act funds. I think it was 3 months ago, so those are being contributed to this project. At least $16 million from CSU as a partner on the site, and $50 million from the Western Stock Show Association. So this is part of the investments that is in the transaction that we just went to market for. The part of the proceeds will be used for a $104 million investment in the Colorado Convention Center to make sure that that convention center remains competitive, not only locally but specifically nationally. Right now, $6 million of that $200 million transaction is being dedicated to a study specifically for the possibility of more of a third level. So it was always anticipated that there would be a third level in that facility. We're doing our research on that at this point in time, with the possibility of that being part of the scope. So I just wanted to close with some items that are on the horizon for the city, and this is probably maybe too brief of a list. But the National Western Stock Show and the Colorado Convention Center are kind of right in front of us right now. Those are the most immediate transactions that we're experiencing. 2017 GO bond program, so we're going to have to work through 2016 and into 2017 if 2017's ballot is the goal to, it actually requires a lot of work. It isn't something as simple as just pulling out your 6-year capital plan, saying yes, let's use this list, and then you go to the ballot. You have to socialize a lot of those projects with city council, with neighborhoods, with other folks, business folks across the city. So it's going to take us probably about 1.5 years, if that is our timeline, just to ready that and socialize it with folks. And I just wanted to highlight again, you know, with the growth that we've experienced in the economy, we have seen some challenges that come with that. You know, sales and use tax in 2014 grew by 10.8%, which is fantastic. But with more people comes additional challenges. So you get that revenue benefit, but we have challenges now around affordable housing that we're looking to solve with permanent dedicated revenue. And that looks like right now it will be a component of property tax and a linkage fee. Commercial and residential is being considered at this point in time. That group has worked tirelessly for at least 12 to 18 months trying to develop those proposals, trying to determine what the investment strategy would be to get as many units as possible. And we're following on the heels of a number of other large jurisdictions like Portland, like Seattle, like San Francisco, who've experienced this affordable housing challenge, trying to learn from their experience as we try to program. And then mobility. So as I mentioned before, I think this is kind of twofold. We have a lot of assets, as I listed off before. Maintaining those assets is a goal, but also then expanding those assets. And it isn't always cars. It's also going to be ped and bike. There have been a number of articles in the newspaper about sidewalks and the challenges of gaps in the sidewalk structure. It's going to be a pretty big lift as we address that multimodal mobility challenge that we have in front of us, but that is a challenge that comes with our success. So with that, I will wrap up. I hope I haven't gone over my time too much, and just take some questions. Yes?
On one of the earlier slides you showed, Denver was the current forecast rated them as #1, but
yes.
The future forecast rated them as #3.
Right.
Is it because one of the competing cities did better, or Denver slowed down?
I think the challenge was it was us in isolation. They had forecasted out. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. It was this slide, correct? Long-term financial position. If I remember correctly, we had conducted this study just as we were coming, just after we had passed ballot measure 2A. And one of the challenges that they noted was that we had been deferring our capital equipment during the downturn, and that our challenge was getting caught up on our capital equipment investment. So we were deferring police cars, fire trucks, all of those kind of, they're not discretionary, but you know, when we were in a tight budget position, we were deferring those purchases. Those other cities were not at this point in time. So when they looked out over time, they said, well, you're going to have to catch up. These other cities don't have to. That impacted our midterm forecast. Now that said, when we passed 2A, we did incorporate a fleet catch-up provision as part of our investments. So that way we were able to help alleviate a part of that. But it was still noted as a challenge because of what we had done in the previous few years.
How much is the city making on marijuana taxes?
So, I knew I was going to get that question. So, in terms of retail alone, I believe it is $13.9 million per year. So that's a combination of the base sales and use tax. So that's the base 3.5 that was on the tax bill beforehand. An additional 3.5% in 2012, I believe. 2012. And then we also have a component of state shareback funds. So the state has its own tax structure, but one of the components that they put in is that if a jurisdiction opts into retail sales, then part of the collections at the state come back to the local entities. So that is also a component of it as well.
If you comment in light of what's going on in the country with unfunded pension liabilities.
Yes, so for cities like, I always try to read up on like Detroit. There was an article the other day, or maybe a couple of weeks ago, on Philadelphia and $5 billion worth of unfunded liability. That's a significant challenge and a significant risk. I'm proud to say that we are 68% funded. Before the downturn had occurred, we were at 98% funding. But that was, I mean, that downturn carved a lot of our funded status off. But every time the pension fund for the city and county of Denver has come back and said, we need you to increase a percentage or 2% into our pension fund to meet our actuarial tables, we have done that. We have met that commitment every single time. But it does continue to be a challenge for cities.
What's their assumption?
What's their assumption, like their rate of return each year? They just reduced it from 8% to 7%.
7 3/4.
7 3/4. Damn, this job is doing so well.
Today's interest rate environment, that looks like such a stretch still.
Yeah, and I think they're going to be looking at that year in and year out. It was something that came up even during the downturn. I remember I wasn't part of those conversations at that point in time, but it was something that they were being challenged on during the downturn, and I think they're committed to continuing to look at that. Oh.
In terms of Denver's finances, what keeps you up at night?
So I got that question the other day, and I think what I want to make sure that we do is when we commit to something, we maintain that. We see that commitment through. So there's a lot going on in the city, and I want to make sure that as we invest across these multitude of different programs, affordable housing, homeless services, major bond projects and whatnot, that we continue to make sure that we can meet that commitment. So I probably am always anxious about, I'm fairly conservative when it comes to our revenue forecasts and whatnot, so I always want to make sure that we have those funds available, that when we make an investment, we keep that investment, we keep that commitment to the city.
What impact do you think these low oil prices would have on the city budget?
Yeah, that's a good question. It goes to kind of my revenue forecasting piece. So I think it was about 18 months ago when oil prices started to soften. There were a few companies from downtown who had come in and talked about some of their concerns and whatnot. At that point in time, it was 17% of the leased space in downtown was in oil and natural gas. So that was a significant concern on my part. As that landscape has shifted, what at least I've emotionally observed, I don't have stats on it at this point in time, we've been fortunate in our economic climate that a number of different businesses have come in and backfilled that space, specifically tech companies coming into town. So that has been a concern. I've kind of heard that that Denver is not the primary hub of any of these major oil and natural gas companies, that they have satellite offices here. So my concern has always been, well, if things get tight, we'll retreat back to your home base. So the nice compliment to that, though, is that we've had other businesses come in and take that space. So I was pretty anxious about that when it first started to happen, for sure. Now that said, the other thing that OD will remind me of is that puts extra money in consumers' pockets. So I think that probably helps with sales and use tax, but just the economic uncertainty that seems to be out there is, I think, making folks cautious. So what economic development has told me is that they're just not seeing people spend that money at the same rate that they're saving, that it's being returned to their pockets.
What sort of level of detail or visibility do you have into the population growth? Like, what sort of data do you guys look at to attribute where that's coming from, and then incomes and different statistics on who these people are, how much money they make, all that stuff? So we rely on the state demographer's office for that kind of information. We don't have our own city demographer to get into that level of detail, and unfortunately at this point in time it's typically a look back.
So by the time we're getting those stats, it's like, well, who showed up here 3 years ago? And what kind of profile were they, socioeconomically, what part of the country were they coming from? So I don't have a lot of great immediate numbers at this point in time, so, but that's something that I'll follow up with. The Office of Economic Development engages with the State Demographer's Office on that kind of information, but we'll follow up on that.
I guess my question would be, since politicians like to spend other people's money, the question is how much emphasis is placed on your recommendations and your department's overall vision of what's going on?
I would say, I've only been in the CFO role for 3 weeks.
But
But I will say this, throughout the 4.5 years as budget director, when I was actively advising through every budget cycle, I would say that the Department of Finance's influence on the process was substantial. It was always taken into account when we were reviewing. So just to give you an order of magnitude what that annual process looks like. We would get 40 different agencies across the city. You're probably talking about hundreds of different lines of business. We would get proposals exceeding $90 million. And 500 proposals exceeding $90 million and 400 FTEs. What I would always harp on is let's grow slow and measured, because what I don't want to do is be in a situation where we overcommit and then have to pull back. And especially when you see like 10.8% in core sales and use tax, there's no way that that's going to, every year it's going to be 10%. So that's just a straight line out forever. So we're just going to leverage those funds in perpetuity. And I get that question a little bit from City Council, like, well, if you're overly conservative and we come in over, when do we talk about those funds? Well, we always build that overperformance into the next year's budget forecast. But what I could tell you in the next year's budget forecast is how certain we are that money is going to continue to come in. So I've always professed that we need to have a measured, incremental growth, not just simply programming everything that comes in as it comes in. And we're a little bit different in terms of the state. I know the state goes through quarterly revised forecasts and whatnot, and they tend to program those dollars as they come in. I wait to the next budget process to budget those dollars. So essentially the year closes, we know that those funds are in the coffer, and then we talk about programming those. And usually what I try to do is have a balance between permanent operating growth and one-time capital transfers. So that $26.5 million was due to overperformance in revenue. Well, we're not going to just add 250 FTEs, full-time equivalent staff, headcount, with those kind of funds. We're going to transfer that off into a capital project, a one-time expense, so that way, if revenues soften, we have some choices that we can make instead of being because personnel represents 70% of the general fund's operating budget. Some agencies like the fire department, it's 92 to 93% overall. So they only have one place to go when we start to get into a difficult budget situation. So I have felt in my time in that role and kind of professing what I just told you all, that I've always been hurt. I've never walked out of that meeting and said, boy, I wish they would stop ignoring me. I've always felt like not only the mayor, but also city council has heard and has taken that to heart in terms of when they adopt a budget.
Don't leave.
Thank you.
Yes. In an ideal world, what changes would you make to the capital structure from a funding perspective?
Each year it's a difficult conversation. So, we have annual capital investments of just shy of $100 million. And you think, wow, you could get a lot done with that. Well, with that list of assets, and you start spreading it over all of those asset classes, you don't get as far as you think you're going to get. I would like to see us, consider other permanent capital funding streams. We go through these structures of every 10 years, we do a bond issuance, so that helps us catch up. But the beauty of previous budget of the Better Denver Bond Program was that it was a catch-up provision. It was a catch-up and a keep-up provision. I don't know what the right size of that is. That's a larger conversation, but I think it's something that we need to consider.
Can we do one more? I understand you have a meeting at 1:30 at the City and County Building.
I probably do, but my phone hasn't told me where I need to be yet.
You know how many cranes are downtown versus like the peak in 07, 08, like just comparing the growth pre-crisis to now?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I'm not. My feeling is that it feels like there are more.
Yeah.
But I don't have a direct. I don't have a count. I don't have a count at this point in time.
Yeah.
Could you explain a little bit more about your reserves,
Sure.
the cash flows?
Sure. So in the general fund, there are 3 layers of reserves. Undesignated fund balance. So that is the net difference between revenues and expenditures each year, either adds or subtracts from that amount. Our goal in undesignated fund balance, our operating budget. So that stands at just shy of $200 million at this point in time. Now during the downturn, we spent it was just over 15% down to 10.6% of our fund balance. Because our fund balance policy also says you won't go below 10, which has helped with our AAA bond rating. So that increment from 15 to 10 provides some cushion, but it still requires us to make spending choices to make sure that we don't go below that 10% mark. Contingency is 2% or around $26 million that is budgeted each year in the general fund. So that's kind of like my first line of defense. So I want to preserve the difference between 15 and 10 for as long as I can. Contingency is for unexpected events inside the budget year. So what I want to do is try to minimize unexpected events if things get tight, so that we don't spend that 2% contingency, because then that preserves our fund balance. And then Tabor is the last line of defense, and that has state ramifications or state structures that say you have to build it back. On the number of jurisdictions when flooding happened, I remember there were a few newspaper articles saying, each of these jurisdictions has a Tabor reserve, but they can't leverage it because they can't build it back up fast enough, and the costs are just too astronomical to possibly deliver it. So I still acknowledge that as a line of defense, but it goes contingency, fund balance, but only really between the 15 to 10%, and then the 3% for the Tabor reserve, and that's for the general fund.
What are you guys going to use that $13.9 million for the marijuana? Do you have a plan, or?
So when we passed that, and when that initiative passed for the retail sales, we have set those funds aside for, was it one of my slides? For the enforcement, regulation, and education around retail marijuana. So the majority of those funds, $8 million, is spent on that. I've been holding the balance in reserve because there's just so many unknowns in 2 fashions. One, the revenue stream itself is not all that certain. Like, I don't feel like I could really bank on programming all of that because you just don't know where those trends are going to go. And then secondly, we had this pesticide issue come up last year. Well, we couldn't see that coming. So then you're buying additional equipment that you had. So I try to keep it to those 3 categories, but then keep a reserve to the side so that way, if something comes up or a revenue forecast falls short, we've not over-programmed it.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks for having me.